How many bowls did you have?
One.
I was just thinking, man, you just went crazy. Like beast mode, got like 4 bowls.
In total, there would have been 6 bowls. No, I would have had 2. You would have had 1. Luke would have had 2. That's 5.
That's not bad.
They were pretty full bowls, so.
We should make it like the same again at some point because that was good.
That was yummy.
I wrote down what we did somewhere. I actually don't remember. It's just one of the newspapers.
That'll feel very well.
So, hello. How's everybody doing? Yes? How are you feeling after covering photosynthesis? Not good. Yes, good.
Out of 40 on the third
Combination. Anybody feeling like this? Has anybody honestly read chapter 10?
That was 10.
That was Terry.
Oh shoot! I thought that was the next
And did reading the chapter help?
Well, it's 2.
No, it didn't help.
I thought it was
So is that how you feel about the textbook in general, or more this topic?
Almost.
They're good. They're yummy.
It is a lot. It might be helpful if I open up the next study guide and cast. I'll do that. I'll bring hard copies next time, or
Yes.
if I have time and our
You
break,
want
I can
sauce
print
on
out
that?
some. No, it'd probably be better to. Oh, jeez. All the country. So having that study guide is, I think, helpful in the way that you can go through and you can be like, okay, let me make sure I got this, I got this, I got this. The chapter, I think it's a good textbook for this class. There's some stuff we cover that's not in there, some stuff that's in there that we don't cover. And I feel like in this chapter, it definitely goes into a little more detail than maybe what we went through in class. So it can almost feel a little overwhelming. So I'll get that study guide out to you as soon as I'm able to. And then just even opening up the PDF, we can just check it out on. And then I'll get a hard copy too as well. And yeah. It's kind of a lot. I think Sarah mentioned there's a play or hands-on activity that we are going to do. We'll take time to do that when we review for the exam. So, and everybody will have like a special role in the process that I think will hopefully help bring things together, and then or might bring up more questions. So, of course, between now and when we do that, as we get closer to the second exam, make sure you take that time to go through, watch some of those links. Like Amoeba Sisters, I usually try to have a link to 2 totally different kinds, a different type of YouTube teaching modules or whatever. Amoeba Sisters is one, and then the other one is, oh my gosh, I'm just blanking on it. What's the other one I have? Let me remind myself what I have open up there. Crash Course. So I usually do have Crash Course and Amoeba Sisters cover the same topic. So whichever one that you feel a little more connected to or less irritated by, that's the one I recommend that you watch, okay? And if you really want clarification and you have the time, watch both. Because I think before I put those links up, I do make sure I watch them and make sure that they're explaining things in a way that I'm happy with learning. So definitely watch those. There's the Amoeba Sisters, what is ATP, photosynthesis, and crash course for photosynthesis. And I also am going to open,
That's real or not, but I hope it's not.
depending on how I feel they link together, I need to like look over them again. Lobster simulation for photosynthesis that I'm going to assign for points. We will get points for doing it, and it'll help what we've been learning this weekend. So that'll be an assignment. I heard somebody mention they wanted more assignments. So just kidding. That's not why I pulled it. It's an assignment that is helpful to maybe not all of you, but to some of you, it is.
Glad my feedback is being taken into account.
What's that?
Glad my feedback is being taken into account.
Oh, okay. Uh-oh.
Yep.
Now everybody knows it's you. You guys can get upset. I'm just kidding.
Gosh darn.
No,
Joshua.
it was already pulled. It's already pulled into our assignment. Our assignment mix. What I'm just double checking on is
I guess he
if
was
I
the
want
most
to just
likely
do
person.
one larger one or two smaller ones.
God.
Okay. I have your exams to pass back, and just to give you a sense of where you kind of maybe fall in the class, if you care about that or not, maybe you don't. I think it's interesting. It's really this class. You're a large class, and it's really spread out. It's really interesting, and I want to say that I mentioned this already. This is the first exam. There's still 2 more exams in here. A lot more assignments. A lot assignments are weighted pretty high in here. So you probably saw maybe you might not have done super hot on the exam, but then your grade for the class is still pretty decent. And if you keep going with the assignments, do better on those next exams if you didn't do so hot this time around. There's still hope for you to do well in the class. So keep pushing forward. Those of you who did really well, that's awesome. Keep going with what you're doing, and it will definitely pay off in the long run. So there were 9 A's in here, which is pretty high, pretty good. I'm definitely happy with that. 7 B's and 5 C's, 5 D's, and 7 under that D line. And so that is a bummer in the way that there's, if everybody was down lower, then I'd be like, what is wrong with the exam? But we did have a lot of high grades, a lot of A's and B's, and not as many C's. So it's more like, if we were to be like this kind of thing, right? Interesting thing happened here with the grades for the class. So let's get it like this, right?
That's
Where these are the
That's enough proof that we could do an exam.
square times square root
Yeah.
1
All right.
minus.
Versus it's looking more like this right now, and then under. So there's the 3 components to the grade, and then you can see your total exam grade in your grade book. So the first thing I'm passing back is the slideshow portion.
When we could just
I
go
ran out of
to-
time today. I wanted to group them together. That's crazy because I have spread it out alphabetical order, and I started doing that and didn't have enough time to finish. So I'm just gonna run through, and actually, so that you're do a quick review of photosynthesis. I'll have a little video clip playing while I pass back your grade or your exams. And that first one I'm passing back is the
We shouldn't have to
slideshow
go to this curve. We
portion.
can just go to this one.
I also have your total percent for the total exam there circled, and you can see that in the grading as well. So we have a little video clip, review photosynthesis,
Exam should actually just be
going like
pass or
at the back.
fail.
Well, you like the vanilla flavor?
Okay, this is what JD handed me.
My dad
It
does
said
that
have
flavor,
this
and I
'cause I
went to
don't
the
want
mocha, so.
I think the mocha one's better. They're all fine though. I think they're all pretty good,
I'm not
except for the
saying-
white
I
bottles.
don't think they're good, but like, if I'm gonna pick one, I'm choosing the mocha.
Yeah. No, I definitely don't pick them over like other things most of the time.
Wait, you got a Gatorade and a coffee?
Yeah, I forgot. This was in my bag for a while.
What are you getting at Starbucks later?
I thought I turned that on, but
Who knows? Maybe I might get something instead.
all right. So
Dude,
let's
trying
focus in
some
here on this
Satan.
video
I saw
clip.
that. Thank you very much.
While this is playing, if you have any questions that pop up in relation to photosynthesis, we can talk about it.
There is no pentagram.
And I'll get that light reminder from the light.
Photosynthesis
I went down to
is the
there.
basis for all life.
Squint. That looks like
Thanks to
a
photosynthesis, plants could grow and evolve, and it has served as the foundation for other living beings such as the dinosaurs and the human species. Photosynthesis takes place in leaves of flowers, bushes, and trees.
Also
First, let's find out what a leaf looks like. On top, we can see a thin layer of wax called cuticula. It minimizes water loss and increases the stability and resistance of the epidermis. The main task of the epidermis is the protection of the leaf cells.
This stuff
Cuticula and epidermis can be found on both sides of the leaf.
They're just nice, cute, like the gum.
If you just get
is-
louder.
Yeah, that's what I was like.
On top of the
scared
epidermis, in the bottom, is a spongy tissue that allows the interchange of gases for photosynthesis.
True.
Furthermore, vascular bundles, which can often be seen with the naked eye, allow the transportation of water, minerals, and other products. The palisade cells can be found on top of these veins.
My score was fine.
Palisade cells contain many chloroplasts that can be seen here as green dots. Chloroplasts absorb a major portion of the light energy used for photosynthesis. So let's have a look at one of them.
The membrane.
Chloroplasts have a protective membrane.
My bad.
A liquid called stroma is
Good
found
job.
inside the chloroplast.
I forgot to get
Thylakoids are embedded in this liquid. Thylakoids consist of a thylakoid lumen surrounded by a membrane where photosynthesis takes place. If we take a close look at the thyroid membrane, we see the photosystem
No way,
too.
I'm like
It is linked to the
5%
stroma
higher.
and the lumen. PS2 consists of light harvesting complexes that surround a
get a
photosynthetic reaction
bonus?
center to focus energy.
Oh, wait.
Light harvesting complexes consist of chlorophyll, such as chlorophyll A or chlorophyll
Where'd that
B.
come from?
These chlorophylls absorb light, namely photons, and transfer the
Why did
energy
you get a
to the
sticker?
photosynthetic
Because
reaction
like I'm an
center.
A.
Congrats.
This is the reason why plants are green, as light with a wavelength of about 500 to 600 isn't absorbed but reflected. This is called green gap. The energy of the photons cause the chlorophyll molecule to enter an excited state, and electrons are ejected from the molecule.
Yeah.
As a consequence, the molecule is charged positively. To absorb other photons, the molecule must return to its initial state.
This is out of
Therefore,
40.
it is in need of electrons. To get them, the PS2 uses water.
Yeah, but that's
Here,
the total
electrons are
rate.
ejected
Oh,
from
the
H
whole-
atoms,
the whole
and the
thing.
H atoms are separated from the
That's the
O
test.
atom.
Okay.
This happens several times, and as a result, two O atoms combine to form an oxygen molecule that will be emitted later by the leaf.
Putting back the exam, but please try to
Simultaneously, the positively charged hydrogen ions get into the lumen.
remember the grade that's the percent that's circled is your total rate for the exam. All three things put together.
I'm pretty content with that.
The electrons are transported to the PS1 via an electron transfer chain. In the course of this electron transport, protons are being created that get into the lumen. This will result in a protein gradient between the lumen and the stroma, generating a force called proton motive force. Proton motive force drives ATP synthase that produces ATP from ADP and a phosphate group. This process is called oxidative phosphorylation. The electrons that are transported from PS2 to PS1 are used to balance the loss of electrons in PS1 because PS1 absorbs light, and this results in the oxidation of PS1 and the release of electrons. Electrons coming from PS1 are transported through an electron transport chain to their final electron adapter, NAPD, creating NADPH. ATP and NADPH, which are products of this process, can then be found in the stroma, where a process known as Calvin cycle takes place. No light is necessary for the Calvin cycle. During the Calvin cycle, carbon dioxide is reduced to form carbohydrate in a series of reactions. Here, NADPH is the reducing power source, whereas ATP is the energy source. Glucose is
Now
the
give me
primary
back the other
product.
part.
It serves as an energy source for the plant itself. In the forms of polymers, such as starch, it is also an energy source for animals and human beings. By producing oxygen and capturing energy from inorganic compounds to produce organic compounds, plants are considered to be a very important part of nature and life.
My daughter Natalie, she is the youngest of my 5 children, and she has neuroblastoma.
Well, I don't
She
care.
really didn't have any symptoms until one day she just stopped using.
Today's we have some a few videos. Today's a little bit video heavy. All right, now for this one. Well, first off, for that review of photosynthesis, any questions pop up? Anything stand out? Were you able to follow it even with me wandering around, hopefully? And the chitter chatter happening in the background. Okay.
What?
All right, I do have a link for that if you want to watch that again in our module. All right, this next video, while I finish passing back the rest of the components of the exam, is okay, I was like, it's not working. Is introduction to our first topic. We're going to be covering a couple different topics today. And is the structure, well, we talked about the structure of xylem and phloem and a bit about what they do. And you've already tested on that. But the more physiological part of this, of botany, we're right smack in the middle of that now. We're going to revisit those cell types that we learned about, and just quickly run through how they work and what scientists, what the thoughts are on how they work. And I'd love to hear what you all think about that. So starting out, just a little intro video, then I want to get the wheels turning and thinking about plants and their connection. Really, the emphasis is going to be more on how xylem function in this aspect with evapotranspiration, which we're going to get into in more detail. And this video will just get you thinking more about the connection between plants and climate and the role plants play. Which, when you think about plants and climate, what do you usually think about?
Rainforest.
Rainforest.
Carbon sequestration.
Is a big one. I feel like that's probably what people might think of more readily is, if we
want to sort of like, if we're using our cars and putting more extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, what can we do? Like we can lower the amount of, or we can lessen our carbon footprint, but we can also plant trees, right? And support plants and take care of plants more, right? Because we think like photosynthesis, you've got carbon dioxide being pulled into the plant and getting sequestered into that structure of that plant. So the other side of it is the role plants play in actually making it rain more, or potentially being drier if plants are cut down, and what's happening there with that, okay? Oh, and of course the volume's not working. What did I do? Did I mess with it?
Phytoplankton's a plant, right?
In proverb, hahai no ka ua ikat, that rain wouldn't be much. Rainforest without rain wouldn't be much of a rainforest. I mean, all plants need water to grow, and without it, they shrivel up and die. So what about the ancient Hawaiian proverb, hahai no ka ua ikat ula au, which means the rain follows after the forest? How could that be? Well, all land plants lose water when the pores on their leaves open up during photosynthesis, and this evaporation draws more water up through their stems. With so much rain soaking the soil in rainforests, water is nearly unlimited, and accordingly, rainforest trees can afford to move and lose more water than other plants. All that water vapor rising from the forest feeds moisture-laden clouds while also causing convection. Together, these effects accelerate the formation of rain, which falls to the soil and gets taken up all over again. This cycle of absorption, evaporation, and rain happens everywhere there are plants. However, super wet soil, fast-pumping trees, and hot tropical sun make the cycle so fast in the rainforest that, unlike other biomes where clouds might form in one place and rain in another, in a rainforest, all that water stays in the same region. Without the forest pumping so much water into the air, rainforests wouldn't be as rainy. And without so much rain, the forest couldn't pump so much water into the air. So which came first, the rain or the rainforest? Well, before rainforests, ancestors of trees like cypress, pine, and spruce dominated the land, but they were conservative when it came to using and losing water, so the air tended to be dry, meaning less rain. However, around 130 million years ago, a new kind of plant developed that took the risk of losing more water in return for souped-up photosynthesis. These were the flowering plants, and their risk paid off. Their faster growth enabled them to outcompete the ancestral pines and take over the tropical regions of the globe. These angiosperms lost so much water into the air that as they spread, they brought their own rain with them. And today, tropical rainforests receive more rain than if they were pine forests. In some places, as much as a meter more rain each year. That's equivalent to an extra 2.5 hours of heavy rain each week. Not surprisingly, all that water cools off the forest too, which is why the Amazon isn't nearly as hot as the Sahara or even an East Texas pine forest in summer. But the hot, dry tropics of the past may soon be a part of our future. In parts of the Amazon where vast swaths of rainforest have been logged or cleared for agriculture, unusual droughts are already occurring, and forest fires have become more frequent. Scientists worry that these changes will lead to ever hotter, drier, and more flammable tropics in the coming decades, making things tougher both for the remaining forest and for the people who live there. So when in drought, plant a tree. Seriously. Hahai no ka ua I ka ula au. This episode of Minute Earth is supported in part by Cookie Blast, one of our subscribers on Solo, and also a puzzle game available for iPhone, iPad, and iPod Touch. Thanks for supporting
That
Minute Earth.
sounds like a blast and a Alola.
Alright, so,
Like, look at any Alola character and tell me they wouldn't say it.
when I have had to teach botany online, I have had a discussion about this. And so I'm going to pull this up so we can see the questions, but I'm not going to make you guys do the discussion online because if you do already have any online classes, you're probably worn out on online discussions because anybody who teaches online, we're pushed to have interaction with students. And what better way than to do discussions? I know there's a couple other ways to make it work, but that's a real common one. But we have an in-person class, so we do have some online work that you guys do, but I'll try to have us have discussions in class together, okay? So you don't get too burned out on it online. So, hopefully you pay attention now. Let's see that we can discuss this properly. So what I want you to think about first off is, how does it relate to what we learned? Oh, well, we're actually talking about transpiration right now. Right here. Was there anything discussed there in the video that had to do with bringing up angiosperms and comparing angiosperms to gymnosperms? Did you guys catch that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? What was said?
Angiosperms transpirate a lot more. Get rid of their water.
Angiosperms do what?
Like, have a higher rate of photosynthesis, so they use that more water.
Okay, water goes through, can go through them quicker. And do you all remember why that is? Yeah. Higher photosynthetic rate. All right, yeah. And we just finished the anatomy section.
So stoma and like on this side, on the other side of the and like how it can hold water and then like split close its stoma also. Or something.
Yeah. Gymnosperms have stomata too. Most are not, some of them actually do have a similar leaf structure as angiosperm plants. Like if we think of this, ginkgo is a type of gymnosperm, which we might not think of them, but they have like a broad leaf. But they all have stomata, but angiosperm plants, they do have quite a few of them on their leaves, it's true. Yeah?
Wait, which one was the conifers? I forgot.
The gymnosperms.
The gymnosperms, they have like that recessed stomata, so that way, while they are releasing water, they're releasing a lot less of it. They tend to be a lot more conservative with their like water release.
Yeah, that's true. So we remember when we looked at pine needles, the cross sections of pine needle leaves. Well, pine needles are pine leaves. And you saw those sunken stomata. Conifers do tend to have these really cool adaptations for conserving their water, for sure. Yes?
Angiosperms also have vessel elements.
So the vessel
More water
elements.
goes through them faster, so like little straws.
Yeah. So that's a huge one. So we talked about the components of xylem, and a big difference between angiosperms and gymnosperms is angiosperms have vessel elements, gymnosperms don't. They both have another kind of conducting cell, which is tracheids. And if you remember how water moves through tracheids is by way of those little. Yeah, let me just make sure, guys. Sorry, I'm still checking. I turned everybody back is here. I think I have. Okay. Did anybody not get everything back that they should have? Oh, I am seeing a couple. I still need to get your scan transfer. I'll get those back to you. Yeah. But yeah, if you remember, wait a second. Leo, you have your hand raised. Sorry, I don't want to.
I was going to say it could also be that angiosperms tend to have bigger surface area of their leaves.
Yeah.
So that might contribute to the releasing of water.
Yeah, and most gymnosperms do have much, more narrow, smaller leaves. There's just a few that don't, that have that broad leaf. Ginkgo was one of the examples that I mentioned. We'll learn about a couple others. But yeah, that surface area for sure, and those having more space for stomata to be spread out for sure. Did I see another hand raised? No, okay. So if you remember that shape of tracheids, they have that. So there's one. So when I'm drawing tracheids out, I get reminded of like muscle cells. I almost think of how muscle cells are. kind of like this. So here's 1, 2, 3 different cells, and they have those pits, which are from plasmodesmata. You can, when I've shown you images of them, the electron micrograph images, you can really see they're just covered with dots. And that's one way to tell a difference, because they can look kind of similar to fiber cells. Fiber cells are a little bit more narrow and longer generally, but they have really that similar, like, long, thin, tapered look, but these pits really stand out. And the water moves through those. There's still that general vertical movement of water happening, but it's if you imagine a whole bunch of tracheids all along here, that water is moving through them like so, by way of all these little pits, these connections, and the water's moving through those. They're not open like a vessel element. Has these open, sometimes there's a little bit of secondary cell wall thickening there between them, but they're stacked on top of each other, forming like a long tube, straw. And that water then can move right up. And so more water more quickly can go up through. So that's just what you've learned about the anatomical differences there with the cell structure. If you're thinking about the difference between tracheids and vessel elements. So in angiosperms have a combination of both, having quite a few vessel elements. And then the gymnosperms just have the tracheids. So that is definitely one way. So transpiration. We talked about water molecules already and how water molecules stick together, right? You guys remember that? Mm-hmm. And so those water molecules stick together. Why do they stick together?
Something because of polar.
There's the hydrogen. You've got this cool shape of this molecule. And you've got one part of it that has a slightly positive charge and the other side that has a slightly negative charge. And so those negative charges are going to get attracted to the positive, and they're going to be pulled together. So let's jump over to right here. If we think about an angiosperm plant, and we see these vessel elements, the water is going to be getting pulled in through by way of those root hairs, which are those long, thin, hair-like cells on the epidermis of the roots, and pulled up into the vascular tissue, the xylem, and pulled up through the stem, and up the leaves. Those water molecules are actually being pulled. As one moves up, it's pulling on the next one, and they're pulling. And where are they going? They're going right out the stomata. And so as water vapor, right? And in that, especially if we're thinking about a dicot plant that has that spongy parenchyma, spongy mesophyll. So gas, the water then changes from a liquid form to a gas form and can be pulled right out through these openings. Higher concentration of water inside the leaf than out in the air. That water's gonna be pulled right through. On hotter, drier days, of course it's gonna be, and sunnier days, it's gonna be pulled through much faster. And that's where we talked about with photosynthesis, those plants losing too much water too fast in order to protect and hold in that water, because they need water to survive and not let those cells become flaccid cells, like plants like big, full, turgid cells, vacuoles full of water, they like that. In order to keep that state, then they're gonna close those stomata and hold that water in. But then, water's not gonna go out, but then you're not gonna have the carbon dioxide go in or the oxygen go out, which we talked about last time. All right, so that's one thing. The sticking of those water molecules together is called cohesion. And then we've got adhesion also happening inside, along the surface of the inside of those cells. So here we've got an electron micrograph showing the wood inside a tree. And we've got these large vessel elements. So is this an angiosperm or a gymnosperm? This is an angiosperm. There's large vessel elements and then tracheids all around. The tracheids are going to be the smaller. So a combination of adhesion and cohesion. So remember, the water molecule, you've got an oxygen atom, 2 hydrogens, and you've got a covalent bonds between the oxygen and the hydrogens. You can see the electrons here. The electrons that are being shared between hydrogen and oxygen spend more time over on the oxygen part of that molecule, making it slightly negative, and then making the hydrogen parts of that molecule slightly positive. So you have that pull happening here. Hence, you can see this if we could look really close to those small critters that can actually walk on water, you can actually see the sticking of those water molecules together, right here and right here. And if you've ever done a belly flop, you know how that feels to hit those water molecules. I mean, they're weak bonds, but a whole bunch of them together is pretty strong. And it's like, could be like almost hitting, not quite concrete, depending on how high up you're falling into that water, but. And also those chemical bonds are important for so many aspects of life, our connection with water. That polarity of those molecules is what helps make water such a perfect solvent as well, being able to pull other molecules apart and form solutions. Also, if you think about how much of the earth is water, how much heat is stored in that water. And so it can really moderate temperatures. And generally, you notice this, if we go to the coast, here in California, the temperature on the coast generally doesn't fluctuate that much between wet temps. The temperature generally hangs out around, maybe fluctuates 20 degrees between different times of the year. But what is it here in Redding? If you compare how cold it can get in the winter,
Or average.
get down below freezing in the winter,
And then go up to
and then it gets
110.
up into 110.
Low
Our
estimate.
average is 68 degrees.
I've seen 120.
That's the average, but the extreme is up in the triple digits, and sometimes in the summer. and then down into the 20s
Every winter I forget.
in the winter, 20s, 30s in the winter.
Every summer.
So that's huge.
Well,
And that's a big part of that is being in coastal areas, you've got that body of water right there, helping to moderate the temperature. All right, so
Seasonal depression, but it's summer.
water can melt. I really like emphasize those root hairs. Root hairs do really increase that surface area of roots to be able to absorb more water. And water can go through what's called symplastic, through the cells, and water can also move between the cells. And I was trying to get this going, it's just, I don't know, it's starting to work, but
It's not very happy.
I don't know, certain things this semester.
That was my second grade.
But sometimes I'll
science
get carnations, and that's
except for
cool. So maybe I'll do that too, so we can have that to look at next week.
Is that fresh?
These are fresh. Well, day. And but you can see that it is starting to work. And so if you can carefully pass these around, you can definitely see the blue starting to move up through the veins, I believe.
Well, that's my sandwich is more.
And then this one, the red.
Mainly eat
But it's working.
orange
It
ones.
just,
But
they're just not happy, very happy leaves.
No.
Should give it to Tara.
All right, so anything that's red or blue is what? Xylem or phloem?
What about phloem?
It's mostly going to be xylem, but we'll get into what's going on with phloem. The water's being pulled up through the xylem and then getting into the mesophyll of the leaves,
Right?
and then the water's going out through those stomata.
Yeah, it's like the dye color doesn't change.
But we will talk about phloem's not going to function as phloem is supposed to function without water. So some of that is going to get into the phloem too. Here we've got a nice image showing the vessel elements, and you can see the secondary cell wall thickenings here is pitted. And then right here, these look more like ray, maybe some ray parenchyma cells next to it.
Enrollment again.
So evapotranspiration, because water is evaporating out of the plant, and then transpiration is the term for the water moving in the roots and out to the plant and then out those stomata. So to regulate this, what do we have going on here? So we know about stomata. We know stomata are made up of 2 guard cells. And the actual opening is the stoma. And that means mouth. And then the guard cells surround that opening, right? And then we've got these other epidermal cells that support those guard cells. Now, generally the epidermis, major function, that was on one of your exam questions, was major function of these different parts of the leaf. So the epidermis, major function, yeah. And if you put protection, you were right, and that is a major function of the epidermis. If you mentioned something about stomata function, yes. But generally the epidermis is clear, it's not photosynthesizing. It's the ground tissue of the leaf, the mesophyll. The palisade parenchyma, the spongy parenchyma, those are all green cells that are photosynthesizing. Generally, the guard cells are also green because they do have some extra work to do with opening and closing, and so there are chloroplasts in there providing extra food, extra energy for those cells. All right, so what's going on here? When the guard cells are full of water, are really turgid, that term is turgid, the stoma is open. It's open. And when the plant's getting thirsty, water will leave those guard cells, and then they become flaccid and close. And it's thought that potassium plays a role in this. So potassium is shuttled. So if you remember when we talked about solutions on either side of a membrane, remember that? Tonicity, isotonic, hypertonic, hypotonic. And it all has to do with osmosis, water movement across a membrane. Water is gonna follow where the solute's going. Does that make sense? If there's higher concentration of something, like here in this example, potassium ions, on one side of the membrane, that's going to mean there's a lower concentration of water over there. So then water's going to move over there. Potassium ions cannot move over without being shuttled across. They just can't freely pass through the membrane like water can. So in order to force water from one side to the other, there's special like gatekeepers. You guys learned this too with a cell membrane. It's kind of like a gatekeeper for the cell. It helps to control what's going across. Water can freely pass, but to force water one way or the other, then certain things need to be shuttled across. And potassium ions can get shuttled across. And energy is needed for this to happen. So that's hence why you'll see chloroplasts in the guard cells to provide more energy. So if the plant gets that message from the roots, whoa, it's interesting. It generally gets sent. It's thought to get sent from the roots. It's can dry. There's special signal molecules that come up in the xylem and let those guard cells know getting low on water here, and those potassium ions will get shuttled. Which way the potassium ions get shuttled? Look at this image. Are they getting shuttled into the cell or out of the cell to close the stomata? Out of the cell. So they get shuttled out of the cell and into the cells next to them, and that's where then the water's going to go. It's going to follow along. And then if they need to open, it'll get shuttled into the cell, into the guard cells. The water's going to move into those guard cells to fill up and then open them up again. So that's so potassium. So when we're going to be talking about different nutrients that plants need, and some different purposes why plants need certain nutrients. And so we're going to be looking at fertilizers. And when we look at fertilizers, this one, where are we here? This one has about 16 potassium, all-purpose plant food. And this one for helping to get roses to flower more quickly and more abundantly, also 16. We'll get into that in a little more detail. I was just curious if they would be the same, and they are. That particular ingredient is pretty important at a certain level across the board with plants. But if you're messing with wanting to trigger more flowering, then the other components that we'll talk about are pulled in, are fluctuated. All right, so potassium. You can see why NPK are the three major I guess, nutrients that plants need. They need a lot of things, but those are the ones that you usually look at for fertilizers. So nitrogen and potassium and what's the other one? Phosphorus. Yes.
So you're saying that like the epidermal cells build up potassium to close the stomata outside?
So these the guard cells are considered epidermal cells. And so yes, these are the general epidermal cells surrounding the stomata, surrounding the guard cells, I should be more specific. And so those cells are working together with the guard cells to close and open the stomata. Yeah. So this pulls in what we learned about with osmosis. So a quick reminder of when we messed around with some salt water with our Elevia cells. All right, how much water do plants transpire? This is really amazing. And this is where where I showed that video to kind of introduce this topic, is getting you to think about all the plants in the world and how much water actually goes through plants. Yeah, water's gonna just like evaporate off the surface of the soil, but when you put a plant in it, it's like you've stuck a straw in that soil and the water is just gonna get pulled out of that soil and up through. So here we've got, during a growing season, a leaf will transpire many times more water than its own weight. An acre of corn gives off about 3,000 to 4,000 gallons of water each day. A large oak tree, which we've got quite a few around this building on campus, can transpire 40,000 gallons per year. So that's quite a bit. And this is kind of a nice trick too if you happen to have a clear plastic bag or something clear to help capture water, go around a plant if you need to get a drink. And you're in like you just have plants around you and no water. You can definitely get some good drinking water out of a plant that way. There's some roots, and vines that you can just dig the root up or cut the vine and just take it and just open your mouth and the water will just come right in, like drip right out of it. But not all plants are like that. So.
Will the water taste good though? Imagine it wouldn't.
The couple different plants I've done it with, it's been fine. Yeah. I mean, you want to make sure you're doing it with a plant that you're aware of. Doesn't have any other chemical components in it that might make you sick or something like that. So make sure you're doing it with the right ones. In that way, because you're actually getting a lot of other components in that. If you're drinking like the sap from the plant, or you're crushing a root and just drinking the liquid from that. Whereas this way, you would bypass those chemical components, and you could just get fresh water in this way. Or if you have like plants, if you have like a bowl or some sort of structure and you put liquid or saran wrap over the top and something to kind of like a stick or a rock or something to bring it all together, and it can drip into a cup or some other structure inside. And you can do that as well with salt water. You can have your salt water in a bowl and then another container in that, and the clear plastic over the top dripping. As that salt water evaporates, you can get fresh water to drink. So a similar thing you can do with plants as well. So what came first, the rain or the rainforest? So I introduced with that video, getting you thinking about that connection between plants, the water cycle, and actually plants producing rain, plants playing a big role in the climate and in the weather. So it's kind of tricky. What did you get from the video? What came first, the rain or the rainforest?
The rain.
Because that's
It said they started out with trees that weren't, I forget how they phrased it, but like the trees evolved to how much rain they were getting, and then it became like a constant cycle, and the stronger, more, I don't know, I guess, the trees that could take in the water came after the rain cycle. So. I
and
didn't
then the plants
something,
can,
but
and then it was a cycle. The
Yeah.
plants continually like produced. Have you anybody ever experienced the rainforest? There's been times where I've been in a rainforest where it's like a certain time of the day, it just like the sun will come out for a little while, and then it just starts to it's hot, it's humid, and then certain time of the day, later in the day, the clouds build up, and then it just rains, and it's like intense rain for a little while, and then the sun comes back out, and it's like almost every day like that would happen. And then there's certain times in the rainforest where there's an actual rainy season, and then the dry season. Even in the dry season, there's still rain that happens, but just not as much. So you're familiar in, of course, different parts of the world, there is an intense drought, unusual drought, right? We know that right now there's a lot of crazy climatic things happening. And actually in Panama right now, around the Panama Canal, have you been keeping up with that at all? Hearing about it? They're experiencing a drought like they've not experienced before. You think of Panama, you think of Central America, that's rainforest. And, but this is their dry season when they don't get as much rain. And they're having to cut down the number of ships that go through the Panama Canal by quite a bit because they're low on water to fill in the canal.
Aren't they near an ocean?
Yes, and that's really interesting, right? They don't just use the ocean water because it's different levels. You can't just open a gate and allow the ocean water in. And so they actually have reservoirs set aside of water that fill in the canal when it's needed to move ships through. But those reservoirs also provide water for people. And so they're playing this really interesting balancing game, like making sure there's enough water for the people who live there and enough water to get these ships through. And there's something going on in the Suez Canal as well. There's some stuff happening there that's causing issues there. So prices of things might continue to go up because of trade routes being messed with. So you've probably seen this before, the lungs of the earth being the rainforest. And obviously that's thinking about oxygen and the amount of oxygen that different parts of the world, some provide more than others, and the ocean provides it too, with how many photosynthesizing organisms are on the ocean. And rainforests, of course, there's so much life and density there. But other parts of the world too, the boreal forests, which we heard about, peat moss bogs, right? The sphagnum moss, and how much that as well is kind of like the lungs of the earth as well. Yes?
Doesn't most of the oxygen produced by all the plants in the rainforest get used up by organisms in the rainforest?
I mean, there are a lot of organisms in the rainforest for sure. Yeah.
I read somewhere that like it was like 90% or something of the oxygen produced by the rainforest was used.
I didn't hear it was that high, but that's yeah. Find the journal, the article. But so that's part of it. Then there's also like other parts of the world too, that some areas that provide more than others. But of course it's devastating if rainforests are cut down. The soil in a rainforest generally isn't that great of soil. It's like, it's sometimes challenging to get to replenish when a rainforest has been cut down, slash and burn. cut back. But of course, then you're burning a lot of it that's bringing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. Did you find it yet?
No.
No? And in a lot of parts of the world, of course, there's not so much plant life, but there's a lot of people, and how people cook their food generally is with coal. We're just cutting down the plants, the woody plants around where they live, and actually pushing forward desertification, and that's actually producing a desert. So that's pretty tricky in certain areas. So all these different aspects, when forests are cut down and not replenished, that's the thing. If they're not replenished, we can have all these different things occurring. Higher temps, climate change, global warming, drought, and then this is obvious to see here, loss of species, right? And so when I talk about replenishing, bringing plants in, people will be like, okay, well, let's plant, plants we know are gonna plant well or grow fast. When I was in Madagascar, it was really interesting because you hear how devastated Madagascar is. And yes, there were definitely parts that where it was really obvious, but not as much as I initially thought. And then, but there's a lot of forest, a lot of greenery, and then you look into it a little more, and it's like, oh, it's like pine trees, eucalyptus trees. Those were like two of the real common trees in these certain regions where I was passing through, and yeah, it was rainforest. And so, back 20, 30, 60 years ago, when the forest was cut down, it's like, well, let's plant something else there. Well, that is providing something, right? But the loss of species, you've got loss of those plant species, of course, and then those organisms that depend on the trees that aren't there anymore. And they can't deal with pine and eucalyptus. Yeah.
So, apparently the total oxygen, that the rainforests produce, it's about net zero. But it's the thing that affects climate change is how much carbon that
being
they
pulled in.
sequester, yeah. But if all the Amazon rainforests were cut down, there would be less than a 1% change in how much oxygen is in the atmosphere. So it's the important thing is more about the carbon dioxide that
Carbon
they're
dioxide aspect of it.
sequestering than the actual oxygen.
Right, and that is something that gets forgotten a lot when we talk about breathing. When we're breathing, yes, we are doing it because of the oxygen. That's only half of it, right? The other half is getting carbon dioxide out of our body, and obviously when we're breathing in, we're getting a little other stuff too. But yeah, and really how much carbon is stored in a 20 by 20 meter plot of the rainforest. There's research teams trying to figure that out and putting a dollar sign in a way on forest and trying to get companies to pay to conserve forest or rebuild forest in order to offset whatever their carbon footprint is. And so it's kind of a weird way to look at your shouldn't we just kind of conserve these areas because of the biodiversity and their beauty and how important they are, and because they just deserve to live like we do? But no, it's no, they're putting a dollar amount on it is something that governments, businesses can make, see more of the importance in something. But yeah, so the carbon storage is a huge part of it. And then of course the oceans do provide a lot of oxygen and pull carbon dioxide out as well.
Don't they give the most amount of oxygen, the ocean plants?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like 50% or something.
I think
Maybe
it's
even more. I think it might be. Like some
70.
people say, for every breath, every other breath is thank the ocean, and then the other one thank the land plants. But it might even be the ocean, might even be more. There's probably papers out about that too. So yeah, this is really sad in Borneo, just seeing the amount of deforestation happening in just one island. And it's even, that was 2020. I think it's even worse now. All right. So on that sad note, anything you guys want to mention or ask about or say before we move on to phloem? All right. Remind me about. Ooh. There is one more. Sorry, this is a little video heavy today. There was one more thing I wanted to show you before we move on to phloem.
Where's that time?
And that is getting you thinking about another aspect of transpiration, of how transpiration works. Yeah. I mean, we've got cohesion and adhesion there, right? Does that make sense to everybody? All right. There is a little bit more to it than that. And where is that video? Oh, here it is. This is going to get us thinking about...
Friends would walk up to me and just be like, what the f is in your mug?
Mud water. You guys might have heard about that in our commercial. All right. And of course, my volume again.
Amazing answers. Sometimes the simplest questions have the most amazing answers. Like, how can trees be so tall? It's a question that doesn't even seem like it needs an answer. Trees just are tall. Some of them are over 100 meters. Why should there be a height limit? I'll tell you why. Trees need to transport water from their roots up into their topmost branches in order to survive. And that is no trivial task. There is a limit to the height that water can be sucked up a tube. It's 10 meters. If you suck on a long vertical straw, the water will go no higher than 10 meters. At this point, there will be a perfect vacuum at the top of the straw, and the water will start to boil spontaneously. For a tree to raise water 100 meters, it would have to create a pressure difference of 10 atmospheres. How would trees do that? When I posed this conundrum, a lot of people said the answer is transpiration. And that's when water evaporates from the leaf, pulling up the water molecules behind it. Now that's clearly a mechanism a tree can use to create suction, but it doesn't help us overcome this 10-meter limit.
The lowest the pressure can go is a pure vacuum, which I imagine is not happening inside of tree leaves. Right?
Right, Hank. So you might suspect that a tree does not contain continuous straw-like tubes.
The tree effectively has valves in it. So you don't have a column of water.
This big tube, which you're saying needs to be filled with water, is actually made up of cells.
Although these are good speculations, they don't turn out to be correct. Scientists who study trees find that the xylem tubes that transport water do contain a continuous water column. So how else could the tree transport water from the roots to the leaves?
They don't suck, they don't use a vacuum.
Okay, so how do they do it?
Squeezing like a cow, like you're squeezing a cow udder all the way up. There's little tree muscles in there.
Yeah. Besides being a giant waste of energy, all of the cells that make up the xylem tubes are dead. What about osmotic pressure? If there is more solute in the roots than in the surrounding soil, water would be pushed up the tree. But some trees live in mangroves where the water is so salty that osmotic pressure actually acts in the other direction, so the tree needs additional pressure to suck water into the tree. Then it must be capillary action. The thinner the tube, the higher the water can climb. But the tubes in a tree are too wide. At 20 to 200 micrometers in diameter, water should rise less than a meter. So how do trees do it? Well, one of the assumptions we made is wrong.
The lowest the pressure can go is a pure vacuum, pure vacuum, pure vacuum.
In a gas, this is true. When you eliminate all of the gas molecules, the pressure is zero, and you have a perfect vacuum. But in a liquid, you can go lower than zero pressure and actually get negative pressures. In a solid, we would think of this as tension. This means that the molecules are pulling on each other and their surroundings. As the water evaporates from the pores of the cell wall, they create immense negative pressures of minus 15 atmospheres in an average tree. Think about the air-water interface at the pore. There is 1 atmosphere of pressure pushing in and negative 15 atmospheres of suction on the other side. So why doesn't the meniscus break? Because the pores are tiny, only 2 to 5 nanometers in diameter. At this scale, water's high surface tension ensures the air-water boundary can withstand huge pressures without caving. As you move down the tree, the pressure increases up to atmospheric at the roots. So you can have a large pressure difference between the top and the bottom of the tree because the pressure at the top is so negative. But hang on, if the pressure at the top is negative 15 atmospheres, shouldn't the water be boiling? Yes, it should. But changing phase from liquid to gas requires activation energy. And that can come in the form of a nucleation site, like a tiny air bubble. That's why it's so important that the xylem tubes contain no air bubbles. And they can do this because unlike a straw, they've been water-filled from the start. This way, water remains in the metastable liquid state when it really should be boiling. It's just like supercooled water remains liquid even though it should be ice. So you could say that the water in a tree is supersucked because it remains liquid at such negative pressures.
And that's interesting when you think about the xylem cells, right, that are conducting. Are they alive or dead? They're dead at maturity. But at one time they were living, and they've just never not had water in them. So
that's crazy.
Don't have those. You wouldn't have little gas bubbles.
The true hydration gas.
And why are trees moving all this water up the tree? I want you to make a guess. Say it out loud. For photosynthesis? Actually, no. Less than 1% of the water is used in photosynthetic reactions. Any other ideas? Okay, what about growth? Well, 5% of the water is used to make new cells. Well, so what happens to the other 95% of the water? It just evaporates. For each molecule of carbon dioxide that tree takes in, it loses hundreds of molecules of water. Whoa. Can you believe how amazing this is? Trees create huge negative pressures of tens of atmospheres by evaporating water through nanoscale pores, sucking water up 100 meters in a state where it should be boiling but can't because the perfect xylem tubes contain no air bubbles, just so that most of it can evaporate in the process of absorbing a couple molecules of carbon dioxide. I will never look at trees the same way again.
All right. That was a lot of discussion about atmospheric pressures and whatnot. Any comments?
When do you grow a beard?
Something more plant related, potentially. Okay. So let's
At least 11 years ago.
talk about phloem. What's happening in phloem? But that is pretty amazing. So did you catch about how like of all the water taken in, what percent is actually used by the plant? About 5%, give or take. Some plants might use more than others, depending on what kind of plant it is and the environment and whatnot. But about 5. And most of that is being used by the plant to just help keep those cells nice and turgid. And for chemical reactions to happen in aqueous solutions, you gotta have that water. Photosynthesis is, you need water for that. But the cells are respiring, and water is one of the products of cell respiration. So the plants are actually producing a little bit of water as they're respiring. And but yeah, most of that water, about 95% of it, just goes right up and out the plant. All right, So for phloem, now with xylem, you have that movement from the roots and up and out by way of the stomata, right? And but with phloem, which way is it going? It can go both ways, depending on what. Depends on really the hypothesis is it has to do with source and sink. So you've got the source where the sugars, where the food's being produced at a higher concentration than the sink where sugar is needed, where food is needed. And this is the pressure flow hypothesis. And xylem plays a role in this too. So I mentioned if you follow the red or blue dye up that sad wilted lettuce that I passed around, you might think, okay, that's just the xylem. But some of that, and yeah, it's going to be moving up, is mostly xylem. And it's just going to kind of get those pigment molecules just kind of get stuck up in the cells as the water moves up and out. But the water from the xylem, and it's perfect when you think about video. Let's do a little, you guys can remember, vascular bundle in a stem. Other little cells in here as well, some fiber cells here, and so forth. But generally, this is showing a vascular bundle where we've got xylem and phloem. And they are right next to each other. And so you've got these sieve tube elements right next to tracheids and vessel elements. They're right next to each other. So you've got water moving up through the xylem, and then some of that water is going to be passed over into the phloem. And the sugars, the source cells are those cells where photosynthesis happens, either where photosynthesis is happening in the leaf cells or the photosynthesizing tissue if it's a stem, or if the area where rapidly growing leaves is the sink, then the source might be the other way around, from the food storage taproots and moving up. So either direction. So for this example, looking at the photosynthesizing leaves are the source cells. Photosynthesis results in then extra food that's going to be moved, shuttled by active transport. So if something is actively transported through the membrane, shuttled through, that is similar to how the potassium ions work with the guard cells. It's also, remember when we talked about, here we have our thylakoid membrane, and we have our ATP. ATP synthase. We have hydrogen ions. If we go back to the light reactions, we have hydrogen ions. Getting built up here. And then we have hydrogen ions outside. So remember, this is the thylakoid space. And we want to increase the hydrogen ion concentration inside this thylakoid space, right? In order to do that and force the hydrogen ions against their concentration, that's where we had those high energy electrons moving through the electron transport chain. Remember, we have hydrogen ions being forced through against concentration gradient as those electrons move through the electron transport chain. This is active transport. I didn't specify this the other day. Active transport. Energy is needed, and these electrons moving through the electron transport chain in light reactions provide the energy needed for pumping hydrogen ions across. Now, as those hydrogen ions move through ATP synthase, that's from high concentration to low concentration. That's called passive transport. Okay, these are just some terms I think I didn't cover before that I just want to mention really quick before we get into phloem. So active transport, energy is needed in order to move something across the membrane. Passive transport is just like an opening, like you have ATP synthase, high concentration here of those protons, of those hydrogen ions, and they're just going to move where they can through. So for sugars to be able to move across a membrane, energy is needed. So we have active transport. So if you have sugar being transported across from the cells near the sieve tube elements, those companion cells, remember, water is going to follow along, just like with those guard cells we talked about, the potassium ions. So if sugars are moved into those sieve tube elements, the water from nearby cells is going to move in there. And if you, obviously parenchyma cells also play a big role in xylem and phloem, and those parenchyma cells stay alive, water can move through them as well from the xylem cells. So all these cells are working together, moving water across. So we've got high concentration of sugars. Water is going to move through from the xylem into the sieve tube elements, and that pressure, higher pressure of water, is the hypothesis that moves then the sugars, the sugary water then through those sieve tube elements, or those sieve tube members, or sieve tube cells, whatever. Different. You'll hear them called different things depending where you're looking. So higher water pressure at the source pushes the phloem sap to move towards the sink. Sugar is unloaded at the sink, and then water returns to the source via the xylem. So you have this interesting kind of shuttling movement of water around within the plant as the water is just moving up through the plant and out the stomata. And here you can see specifically, I mentioned companion cells involved in this process. So sometimes the root cell can be the source, and the tips, the apical meristematic region where you've got young leaves, that could then become the sink and where the sugars are going to get shuttled with new growth. Yes?
How would they get back down if the sink's on the top? Do they just go through a different set of phloem?
The sugars?
Yeah, the water when it's. I guess it would stay in.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It would just
Yeah.
probably stay there in that area, or maybe go out the stomata
Okay.
in that way. All right, let's see. It's not showing the other way around, but so this is just showing some tests that have been done in lab settings to prove this hypothesis. And it works pretty much when we talked about osmosis, tonicity. It's just really what we saw with those LOD cells when we added the salt. There's pressure, there's movement of that water, and that movement helps to shuttle then the sugars through. And if you remember, you have these sieve plates where that sugar is then shuttled through those. The membrane stays intact in this whole process. So, bless you. So when we talked about what cells of the xylem are dead or alive, what cells of the phloem are dead or alive, the fact that sieve tube members are still sort of alive, they conserve their cell membranes, is really important in this whole process. Or this wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have that ability for things to move one way or the other, depending on where the concentration of sugar is higher. And then the water follows where that's going, and that's the flow part. Whereas with xylem, the tracheates and the vessel elements, those are completely dead, and they're just the cell walls, just providing a tube for that water to move through. And I think this one's helpful. Watching the sugar, see the sugar move through this process. So this is interesting. So these are aphids. Anybody ever heard of honeydew? Honey? It's thought that there's some ants that do this, and honeybees have been seen doing this as well, and even in our area where we live. So you'll have insects like aphids. They have special mouth parts where they can just like poke right into a leaf or a stem of a plant and get right in that phloem. And then there's all that pressure in there. It goes right in their bodies, and they're able to take some of that sugar from what they're getting. But then it's like so much pressure, they would just explode if it doesn't go out somewhere. So it goes right out their backside. So you get this nice little drop of, decently concentrated sugar, water there. And here you have some ants coming along and just collecting a nice drink.
Oh, yes.
And this is actually, especially during times when it's drought, there's not a lot of flowers for the bees, then they're like, hey, that's a good source. Get some instead of nectar. Get that. All right, so here we have wood in the tree. Remember that vascular cambium, xylem wood on the inside, phloem to the outside. And so in order to get that water over to the phloem, right, because the water is really important. How does the water get from these vessel elements and tracheids over here to the phloem? Yeah, very good. So now you can kind of get more of a sense of the important function of those xylem rays, phloem rays, which ray cells are what cells? Parenchyma cells. They stay alive at maturity, and they can help then move that water then
laterally to then those row of cells. Whereas the rest of the water is just moving up, and then those rays are pulling out, moving what's needed, and moving up and then out those stomata. So this is helpful, just remembering that two-way flow for the phloem, depending on where the source is and where the sink is. All right, any questions? Yes.
So it's based off of the sink having less sugars or of the specific nutrient than the source.
Right.
How do some plants get so much sugar in specific areas, even though, like how do they keep getting sugar in there when, in a fruit? How would they get so much sugar into the fruit if the sink needs to have less sugar than the source?
That's a good question, and that's well. A lot of this, what I haven't talked about yet, is a lot of that's controlled by hormones, signal proteins, and normally, unless it's getting ready to reproduce and pass on, producing flowers, producing nectar, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's, you could also talk about that, like, why is there extra sugar being shuttled there for the production of nectar? And there's certain signals that are turned on for, to let the cells know we need more sugar in this area. But just during this time, and not other times.
So then how they do that is they make some of the cells near the sink. So like would the stem of the fruit be the sink, and then once the sugar gets there, then it's moved into the actual fruit? Because if it's just normal osmosis, it seems like there'd be so much sugar in the fruit that no more sugar would go there.
Right. Yeah, and that is an excellent question. And this is, to my knowledge, it is still considered a hypothesis.
Okay.
And yeah, and I think there's still a lot that science is trying to figure out. And you can see even when we talk about the just understanding transpiration can be complicated. So when you just look at the water molecules, it makes sense, but then you're thinking about the atmospheric pressure and all that, and it starts to get really complicated. And this is even more complicated, what's happening here in this process. Because yeah, after a while, and pumpkins aren't sweet, but how about fruits that are really sweet? At some point, that is a lot of sugar just building up there. And it only happens in certain species, right? So it's certain genetic regions are being turned on specifically for those species in those regions to trigger that higher concentration to be built up. And it seems to kind of counteract this whole this whole idea or this whole hypothesis. Yeah, any of you interested in plant physiology? There's still more to discover and learn for sure. Okay. Let's go ahead and take our break. So we'll meet back here in 20 minutes, and we're going to be talking about hormones and plant growth and movement when we get back. And making molecular structures out of it, like cellulose. So you have cell growth, right? So when you think about what a plant needs to grow, automatically we think of photosynthesis. What do you need for photosynthesis to work?
Carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight.
Yeah, you gotta have light from the sun or artificial light, carbon dioxide from the air, and then water. in addition to that, we also need minerals and nutrients. And the plant gets these, they are such a small amount that, remember that study that was done to figure out, like, weigh the small plant, weigh the soil. Take a few, 5 years or so for the plant to grow, then weigh the soil again. The soil is, there's minerals in that soil that get pulled out, but it's such a small amount compared to, you know, the amount of water needed for the plant to grow and the carbon dioxide, of course. So so the major things, obviously, are light, carbon dioxide, water. And then you need some place for the plant to grow. Generally, we think of plants growing in soil, but there are some plants that grow on other plants. Those are epiphytes. And some plants will grow actually in water. So, but the norm is in soil. And so the plant can get these nutrients, macro and micronutrients, from the soil. So what do you think the difference is between macronutrients and micronutrients?
You need more macro.
Yeah. Macro, bigger, they need more of those ones. And micro, not as much. So what are those macro? When you look at fertilizer, I mentioned there's the three main numbers that when you look at a fertilizer package that show up. Pretty big there. And that's the NPK. It's always going to be in that order. And sometimes, like this one's helpful, it actually specifies that's N, that's P, that's K. But sometimes it doesn't even specify that. And I'll pass these around so you can look at them. And I'll write it up on the board as well here.
Needs to be a sticker.
For this special rose food, in order to grow nice flowers, 18, 24, 16.
20.
And then for this all-purpose one, this one is rose food. And then this more all-purpose, we've got, and this on the side here, you'll see when I pass around, you can try to find it. It's not as easy to see as like this bag. It shows, you have to kind of look in the side like the nutritional facts. So this one's 24. Is that an 8? Oh, I think I need to get some new glasses. Alright, so carefully pass that around. You can look at the differences there.
Why does it need
on the
some?
side. Look. That's even like too small for me to read right now. But it does, it also, as it goes around, also take note underneath these main macronutrient labels, you'll see the micronutrient content and what's happening there in these boxes. So these are the primary macronutrients. Nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Right off the bat, can you think of some things a plant does with nitrogen?
Grows.
What's that?
Grows.
It grows, right? Yeah. The plant, and okay, these are also things that the plant doesn't, it can't produce them on its own, right? It needs them.
Makes nitrogenous bases for proteins, DNA, RNA.
Yep. You gotta have that nitrogen for nucleic acids and amino acids, for proteins, DNA, RNA, nitrogen. Very important. And What about phosphorus? Can you think of anything? ATP. Adenosine triphosphate. Gotta have phosphorus in there. Also, we'll get into the components of nucleic acids, and RNA and DNA, but the backbone of DNA and RNA is sugar phosphate. Sugar phosphate, sugar phosphate. So phosphate's really, really, really important. And then we've got the potassium. We'll talk about some different things potassium is used for. What's one thing that we just talked about?
Water regulation.
Transpiration.
Yeah. To get those guard cells to either fill up with water or let water out in order to control evapotranspiration. Very good. So those are primary macronutrients. Essential elements. Well, that we already talked about. That's given. Carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Carbon, hydrogen, the components of all organic molecules in nature. Skeleton, central core. And then we've got secondary macronutrients. So the primary macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. The secondary macronutrients, so needed in a high quantity. Not as high as NPK, but still higher than the micros. Calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. Okay, plants cannot live without any of these. So don't confuse essential plant nutrients to essential elements. Plants can't live without these other macronutrients or the micros. The micronutrients are iron, manganese, copper, zinc, boron, and chlorine. So, as that box goes around, see if you can see. Honestly, I needed to actually take a picture and expand it because my glasses were not letting me see that tiny.
Creature.
So just like you're looking at the nutritional facts of the food. I used to love to do that with cereal boxes when I was little. I mean, it's nice when the cereal box has something silly and fun on the back too, but I like to read those nutritional facts for some reason. Yes?
Is it an accident, or I guess maybe a coincidence, that all the secondary macronutrients are salts, or am I misunderstanding?
No, I mean, I don't. Yeah, I don't know if there's any kind of specific connection in along those lines.
With the copper, so I know Mom was telling me about an old limestone because we were digging up wolves in our yard and pennies in them. Is that why people would put pennies in bowls to help put them grow because they would take the copper. They would
Yeah.
the copper.
I don't know exactly. Well, that works, I think, probably a little bit.
She called it old limestone. So
I mean, a little bit might come off of it. Yeah. That's interesting.
Isn't
But
there
it is micro. It's like hardly any is needed, so it could potentially get to a point where it's too much being pulled in. And so what's tricky is when a plant is either getting too much of something that it shouldn't get, not enough of something. There's certain characteristics you can look for in a plant to help you know what it's lacking or what it's getting too much of. Some of them overlap. It looks really similar. But we'll talk about a little bit of that. So this is just thinking about all the different things that the plant produces for itself, or for, in some of them, potentially for communicating or interacting with other organisms, in trying to entice them to come help them out, in pollination or seed dispersal, or trying to communicate to not eat me, or different things. So thinking about different kinds of nutrients and nutrients found in the soil. Obviously you've got, where's this working? Oh, there we go. Natural fertilizers, such as manure. As that breaks down, then that can be accessible for the plant. Sometimes you can put too much of something, you know, maybe manure might be considered too hot, or the nitrogen is too high, and it can actually burn the plants. It can be too strong. And then some plants, they've evolved in order to overcome living in very nitrogen poor environments. And so they might have certain characteristics that help them be able to get nitrogen in different ways. What are some examples of that?
Like carnivorous plants?
Yeah, carnivorous plants is an excellent example. Also, if you remember, I brought in that little tiny American vetch, and we looked at little root nodules. It had little structures, little houses in the roots for harboring bacteria, to get bacteria to live there. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria is another way. And if you actually have like the little workers living in you that produce nitrogen that's accessible for you to use, then that's awesome route to go. But there's some plants out there, I use corn as an example, that don't have that kind of relationship with bacteria and can't catch insects with their leaves. If they are not getting what they need, they'll just die. So some plants are able to overcome the shortage or where they're getting their nitrogen. Otherwise, they depend upon animals or humans to provide it. So now that you've been through anatomy, you look at this and it all makes sense to you, right? Got this stuff down. All these different cells and what's happening here. What's this green stuff? Oh, it tells you, dang it. Cortex, so you got ground tissue, and then remember the endodermis, and then the pericycle, and then you get into the xylem.
Skips.
In addition to the root hairs helping with increasing that surface area, we've also got fungal associations forming mycelium. These fungal hyphae connecting with the roots and expanding and providing much higher absorption. And we're not just talking about water here, right? We're talking about the nutrients, the minerals, the food in the soil. So it really increases the ability for plants to pull in those macro and micronutrients that it needs. So here it's showing no colonization, and with mycorrhizal colonization, how much more the plant is able to absorb the nutrients it needs. Not just water. I know that was the emphasis before. Now, focusing more on the other things that are coming in with the water. And we'll talk quickly about how the plant gets, how those components get in with the water. And this is sort of, I actually forgot that I had this in here as we were just talking about membrane transport. But you guys are up on this now. You know the difference between active and passive transport. Active transport is generally going to happen if what needs to get across is too big, is not able to get through, maybe because it's an ion. Ion wouldn't be able to pass through, or or it's being forced against a concentration gradient. So different kinds of things. With the hydrogen ion example I talked about, because it's an ion and because it's going against its concentration gradient, it's got to have something to help it get through. Either it has to have a special opening, a channel for it to pass through, like this, or it needs to have energy actually pulled into the picture to help it go through then against the concentration gradient. So when I say against the concentration gradient, I'm meaning normally you'd anticipate something moving from high concentration to low, like this, and not low concentration to high. And then diffusion is just, it can just pass right through the membrane. High concentration to low concentration, passive transport, no energy is needed. So how are we getting these different components into the cell, into this root cells? And here we've got hydrogen ions actively transported out of the vacuoles of root cells and into the soil. This is kind of crazy. Okay, so we know hydrogen ions, right? We know they have a really important role in the light reactions and making ATP synthase work. They also have a really important role in helping the plant be able to pull in the nutrients it needs. These brown blobs here are clay particles. So if we're thinking about soil, anybody taking a soils class? So you could teach this part, right? You know it? You know stuff? What are the major components of soil? These soil folks.
Clay, sand, and silt.
Yeah. So you got clay, sand, and silt. And if it's too high in clay, that good or bad? Then they're gonna all those clay particles stick together. And so it's better to have a mix of things going on. More of a lump, like more sand in there too. So clay, these clay particles, they actually, the way the surface of clay is, it's negative. It's negatively charged. And so these cations, these positive ions that are the nutrients that the plant needs, are stuck to it, stuck to these clay particles. So if too much clay is together, it can stick together, and then you're not going to be, those nutrients wouldn't be accessible for the plant. And then you've got to think about the water side of it. Water is not going to be able to get through either. That clay all sticks together. So having a mix of the clay particles, which are the tiniest, and then the sand, and then the organic material, all having it kind of mixed together. And then where are these nutrients on the clay particles are coming from that organic matter being broken down as well. Not all of it, but some of it. All right, so hydrogen ions are leaving the cells, and the hydrogen ions displace the minerals from the clay particles. And so then now those nutrients are now freed up, and it's like switching, swapping the hydrogen ions for, here's a potassium ion. So they're released in the solution and can be taken in. This is from a little video, a little animation that we don't have time to go through all the animations, but I have. It looks kind of overwhelming. All these different animations I have on Canvas, but they're really short, and we just don't have time to go through all of them. Is it this one? Nope. Yeah. Okay. Let me just point them out to you. So I strongly recommend that you. Well, I guess it's not that many. But they're pretty. They are. They're not really long. I'll just play it in quickly, and not the whole thing, but just get you to just visualize it. So there's a handful of videos, but they're each about 5 to 6 minutes long. And it's really helpful just seeing the ions, how they're stuck to the clay particles. And then you've got
This thing now.
It explains it really well. I wanted to get to the part where the hydrogen ions. Oh, I think I might have clicked on the wrong one. Anyways, it's a similar kind of thing where they're swapping. There's actually a couple different ideas of how this works. But I recommend that you go and go through and watch these different clips. It'll make a lot more sense. And also some of these cycles. So cation exchange and like so, and then you also have ATP is needed in order to force the different nutrients into the cells. So when we talk about one of the functions for ATP, one of the functions is in membranes and trying to help. Hold on, hearing the volume. You guys can hear that. There we go. So different kinds. This is a potassium pump, pulling the potassium ions in to the cell, and ATP is needed to force the hydrogen out, because the concentration of hydrogen is higher inside the cell than out. And then we have the hydrogen can be pulled back in as well. So that's one way. Another way is carrier concept. And for the sake, you'll see I'm going to get your study guide opened up for you so you can see. There's not a lot of detail. A lot of this detail I'm not having you memorize for the exam. But it is helpful to just get a little bit of an understanding that there's some different ideas of how the nutrients get into the cells, because it's a really complex process. And this one is the carrier concept. There's the swapping of the hydrogen ions and the cations, and then carrier concept. The mineral ions get pulled in with the carrier protein, and the protein changes shape. So we talked about enzymes functioning kind of like ATP synthase, but special protein complexes embedded in the membrane that shuttle the ions through into the cell. So one of the videos, so we're going to be watching a video today for that last hour of class. There's another video you're going to be watching at home, and that one actually has a little study that's done watching roots growing through the soil and actually watching them grow quickly, and then when they hit a location where there's a lot of good nutrients, growth will stop or slow down, and so as much absorption of these nutrients as possible can occur. And so it really is kind of like these roots are just moving along, mining, looking for nutrients. Not just water. So all these different, these are just a few of the examples of how the minerals and nutrients are used by the plant. Obviously carbohydrates and proteins are structure for the plant, like cellulose is a carbohydrate. And then proteins pulled in that carbon, hydrogen, and then of course the nitrogen is pulled in as well. Organic molecules used in metabolism, the magnesium and chlorophyll pigment molecules, phosphorus like you mentioned in ATP, enzyme activators such as potassium, and maintaining osmotic balance. All right, so these are just a few examples of different things we've already talked about of how some of these nutrients are used in a plant. Here we have chlorophyll molecule where you've got magnesium, and then also showing the importance of nitrogen in those molecules as well. And phosphorus and nitrogen playing important parts of the structure of ATP and NADPH and NADH, DNA and RNA, phosphorus and nitrogen, proteins. Sulfur plays an important role in many proteins. And then cycles, the nitrogen cycle I mentioned. There's nitrogen in the air right now. We're breathing it. It's not doing anything for us. We're breathing it in, breathing it out. It's gas. Nitrogen has to be fixed. It has to be in a solid state for us to be able to use it and pull it in. And we do that by eating. Plants eat it by way of through their roots into the soil, or they might actually eat it in their leaves, right? Like carnivorous plants. Here's a nitrogen-fixing bacteria. These little root nodules I showed you all earlier in the semester. Nitrogen from the air is pulled in. The bacteria are able to change its structure just enough to fix it and convert it into a solid that then the plant can do something with. Yes?
Is that why beans are considered such a good cover crop? Because
exactly. Mm-hmm. So I think I mentioned earlier that you'll have like a cornfield, and corn is just like, you gotta put fertilizer on that corn, and it's gonna suck in a ton. It uses a lot of nitrogen. And if you don't, an option for not using a whole bunch of added chemical fertilizers is you just rotate it with soybeans. And once you pull those soybeans out, that fixed nitrogen is still in the soil, left over from those beans. And everything in the bean family, the legume family, does this. It's a pretty special group. And the seeds from these plants also have high nitrogen content, right? So if you think about beans have really high protein content. It sort of starts as a little bit of an infection here. The bacteria infect the root hairs, and then the root hairs swell and expand and form kind of this little like tumorous growth that is like oak gall. Did we talk about oak galls before? We'll talk about them. But they're just a little baby wasp inside. It triggers the cells to develop and grow and expand around it and kind of separate that baby wasp from the rest of the plant. This is a similar thing happening here, except that the plant likes this interaction, and it gives the plant will give food to the nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and the bacteria provide fixed nitrogen to the plant. So nutrient deficiencies. If you really want to get into this, I highly recommend taking a horticultural class over in the farm. Limon Way has a lot of great classes over there, and you can learn more about like what's wrong with my plant. It's doing this or that. But in here, we'll just mention the different kinds of nutrients that plants need. I want you to be familiar with that. What are micronutrients? What are the macronutrients that plants need? And but I'm not going to be testing you on this specifically. But it is interesting if you do, some of these things, like holes in your leaves. If you know there's no insects there eating the leaves, then there's a pretty good chance that would be potassium deficiency. And you don't see that with other kinds of deficiencies. But the yellowing of the leaves is something pretty common in a lot of different things. Could also be that the plant's not getting enough sun. The leaves can start to turn kind of yellowy or to white. But iron deficiency is classic, and nitrogen. Both of those will cause a yellowing to the leaves, and so forth. So, so if you want to try to treat your plants, if you notice something's up, you're doing a good job with watering it, giving it good light, and you can look up something like this and try to figure out, like, maybe I need to get a fertilizer that has a high amount of this particular nutrient that looks like the plant might be missing or not getting enough of. All right, so those are plant nutrients. Any questions about those? So that's food for the plant, what the plant needs to build itself, to function properly, and also to be able to build important signaling proteins and hormones. So the hormones will trigger the plant to grow a certain way, to start developing flowers, to grow this way or that way. Will trigger cells to change and become another kind of cell and whatnot. These are molecules that are also can be considered communication molecules. For the plant to communicate, for the root of the plant to communicate with the leaves of the plant, for plants to communicate with other plants around them or other organisms in the soil. So these are hormones. Hormones comes from the word hormone, which is to stimulate. And these regulate, coordinate metabolism and growth, and you don't need very much of it, which is good, because it takes extra energy and components for the plant to produce these. Only a little bit's needed. These hormones can trigger, like I said, a cell to become a different kind of cell, and so you're going to have different genes being expressed, depending on what hormone gets sent in the xylem or the phloem, depending on which direction or where it needs to go. So with hormones, and in plants, plant hormones are called phytohormones. And in our bodies, hormones do the same kind of things. It's for our bodies to be able to communicate between different parts of our bodies. We use hormones as well, and to trigger growth to occur, or changes to happen, moods to change, and all kinds of things are connected to those wonderful chemicals called hormones. So 5 major hormone groups I want you to be familiar with. So that's good, right? Only 5, it's not too many. You guys can do this. And probably some of them you'll already be familiar with. Maybe you've heard. Anybody heard of auxins before? If you've done any kind of plant growth, you might have heard of some of these. Cytokinins. All right, so maybe that's just a new language. We're learning new words today. Ethylene, does that one sound familiar? Okay, that one is the most common one. Abscisic acid and gibberellins, or gibberellins. You'll hear it pronounced both ways.
Oh.
Okay. All right, while you're writing that down, I am just remembering I gotta grab the video worksheet, so we can get the film started. So these 5 phytohormones, we'll go into a little bit of what they each do, and I'll save that for next time. So actually, I think I will. Let's get this going. So we're going to watch, I just realized how the time is flying. we're going to watch the film of In the Mind of Plants. Alright, so this film, there is some definite discussion about hormones, about growth, about the topic that we're on. So try to like hone in on that and enjoy the film. It's one of my favorites. I have a lot of favorites. And it is a perfect companion to the other film you're going to be assigned. Alright? So I'm going to go ahead and get started and grab our worksheets and get those passed around. And then of course, there shouldn't be questions right off the bat yet. So this is just the intro. And then we'll be able to help each other out at the end if there's any questions that we're missing. And of course, I'm having a volume issue again. Oh yeah, I turned that one off.
I haven't opened this app like a single time.
What if they have?
There we go.
Plants belong to another universe, a silent and seemingly simple world. They make food from sunshine, which in turn feeds the animal kingdom. But what if plants were keeping something from us? What if they have minds? What if they are intelligent? Scientists are asking these very questions. Do they perceive their environment? Do they have a memory? Could they have a nervous system? To these men and women, the great divide between the plant and animal world is not that great at all.
Dumpies, there was a metal rod. I do it like we can.
Our investigation into the mind of plants begins with a mystery. A murder mystery. In the late 1980s, a serial killer was stalking the Limpopo Savannah. At the time, there was a severe drought.
All right, everybody, the first question. What was happening in the Limpopo Savannah of South Africa?
Drought?
There's more. There's a little more, but just getting you thinking that that's the first question. The second question.
He's turning subtitles and down with them.
Is, I don't want to say it because that's what's nice thing. These guys are called kudus, and they're dying. What was killing the kudu, and how was it killing them, and where is it produced? Okay, so those are the first two questions which involve this first big chunk of the film. Okay.
The country was devastated. Water holes had dried up, and food became scarce. Only the tough and widely spread acacia provided any sign of hope to large herbivores such as the kudu. These beautiful and robust animals could nibble around the tree's defensive spikes, plucking its small green leaves. Death by starvation seemed averted. The hard times could be survived. But then something strange began to happen. Large numbers of healthy kudus suddenly dropped dead.
What's killing the
Thousands
kudus?
littered the landscape.
Man.
The deaths continued for months with no clues as to why. The kudus lived on game reserves and were an important source of income to their owners and the tourist industry. The cost was high for both animals and people.
It's very distressful to me to see such beautiful animals just lying dead for no reason. So I decided I've got the time and I'm going to find out what it is.
I found another dead kudu.
We've lost 34 kudus. And the strange thing is that they die and they don't look bad.
They just look dead.
Maybe asleep. They try waking
We
up.
are very worried at that stage on this situation there. And that's why we've spent the money to try and determine, because the autopsies are expensive.
The veterinarian through the autopsy couldn't say anything. He couldn't find anything wrong with the animal. He said he made a suggestion we should actually look further into the process and see if we can't get any university involved.
The job of detective fell on this man, Wouter van Hoven, a distinguished conservation biologist and specialist in great African herbivores.
The thing that was the most puzzling in this whole thing of kudus is that there were mortalities on certain ranches, but on other ranches there was no mortalities. And you know, we couldn't understand this because, you know, game ranches are fenced in and the ranches are very much similar. Some ranches they die, some ranches they don't die. So then we started making a survey, and what we found is that there's a direct relationship between the number of kudu on the ranch per unit of size and the number of mortalities. So mortality was density related.
It wasn't much to go on. The more the kudu stayed as a group, the more chance they had of dying. It was clear that predators did not kill them. There were no obvious marks on their bodies. Finding the cause of deaths would need further investigation. Van Hoven arrived with a fully equipped mobile lab and a team of students to help him carry out a series of autopsies.
I looked at some of them post-mortem because we couldn't find any diseases, parasites, nothing of that.
Van Hoven then focused his research on the dead animal's stomach content. Kudus digest their food in a way similar to cows, needing the natural fermentation process to help it break down plant matter. The first post-mortem analyses showed something very odd.
I looked at the intestines, and particularly in the rumen, and had a look at the efficiency of fermentation, the rate of fermentation. And that was the next clue, that on the farm where the animals died, the rate of fermentation was lower than the neighbor which had less kudu, and there was no mortalities on his farm. Something was influencing the rate of fermentation. Now what could that possibly be?
As the research continued, they found something even stranger. All the dead kudus had unusually high doses of tannin in their bodies. Tannins are molecules that some plants use as a chemical defense to fight off parasites and leaf-eating insects. Plants normally only produce small quantities of tannin, and large herbivores can just flush this low toxin out of their system through the liver. But the tannin levels were far too high for the kudus to handle, resulting in the slowing down of the fermentation process and the animal's ability to digest its food, with fatal consequences. The deadly tannin had to come from plants, as it only occurs naturally in them. But which ones? And how or why would any plant produce enough tannin to kill animals on such a massive scale? We shouldn't be too surprised to hear that plants kill animals. Unwary creatures can find themselves in an upside-down world where What they normally eat eats them. Carnivorous plants have evolved elaborate traps, some with sticky fingers. Others have snapping jaws or slippery slides to catch prey. This is how they've adapted to living in poor soil and compensate for nutritional deficiencies.
That one's getting away.
They've even pushed the limits of refinement by growing their sexual organs far from their stomachs in order to spare pollinating insects. Jean-Jacques Labatte is a specialist in carnivorous plants. His collection in southwest France is unique in Europe.
There are about 650 species of carnivorous plants throughout the world. The only places where you won't find them are the poles and deserts. The most fascinating of them is the Darlingtonia.
I have to mention, this is what we have in California. So it's pretty cool. They're growing it. He's growing it in. Yeah, it's one of his favorites. Pretty special.
The Darlingtonia, also called the cobra lily, has evolved remarkable urn or trumpet-shaped traps. These urns, which stick out like cobra heads, have an appendage shaped like a mustache or a forked tongue. An insect is attracted by the color and nectar. It lands on the plant and climbs up the length of the tongue. It comes to a hole underneath the dome. Feeding on the nectar, the insect loses its footing and falls to the bottom. There's no water at the bottom, so it will take off again. And there, look, it's fantastic. False windows due to different thicknesses of its cell walls. The insect believes that the light shows him the way out, and for hours it will bump into those fake windows. It will never find the exit that is actually under its feet. After a while, the exhausted insect falls to the bottom where the plant slowly digests it.
Stupid insect.
A brilliant strategy from the plant world.
Carnivorous plants are the exception to the rule. In general, the question of who is superior is simply answered, and the line between the two worlds is clear. Plants make their own food using sunlight through a process called photosynthesis, while the animal world feeds on them. We don't just classify plants by the way they make food, but also by movement. Plants are fixed, whereas animals run, crawl, swim, or fly to feed. Yet in the world of single-celled organisms, this line is blurred. Some can act as both an animal and a plant, hunt for food, and use photosynthesis. Today, biologists believe that plants don't share the same evolutionary origins, separating mushrooms, mosses, and others into different kingdoms. Botanist Professor Francis Hallé specializes in the structure of trees and the ecology of tropical rainforests. For Professor Hallé, the world of plants is a misunderstood kingdom full of wondrous treasures.
The Americans have sequenced human DNA, 26,000 genes. The problem is that a few years later we sequenced the genome of rice, 50,000 genes. That gave us a cold chill, and many biologists thought we would have to abandon the idea that the more genes an organism had, the more evolved it was. Axel Kahn, a colleague and human genome geneticist, told us, no, don't drop this idea. The more a living creature evolves, the more genes it has. This simply proves that rice is more evolved than us. Try spending all winter with your feet in cold water, feeding only from the sun's rays and carbon dioxide. Well, you couldn't. And the reason is that you don't have the right genetic equipment. You don't have enough genes.
Plants and animals are not in a race. We can't say that plants have overtaken us. In reality, it's a strange kind of race because one goes left and the other goes right. Their strategies are inverse. So now we have to recognize that on their journey, plants have gone much further than we have on ours.
Plants and animals have evolved alongside one another. Plants may feed animals, but in return, they ask to be pollinated and have their seeds dispersed. They've developed an arsenal of biological weapons to protect themselves, but they've also created a treasure trove of seductive powers. Their
Did you guys get that? The number of genes in human and
26,000, 50,000. I only have 4.
I'm seeing a lot of people looking around. When you're watching these on your own, you can pause it and go back and whatnot. So how many for humans?
26,000.
And then how many for rice?
50,000.
50,000. And what's the major come away from that?
Rice are more involved.
More involved. Okay. If class ends and we're not quite done, we'll just save that a little bit for next. Just so you know, I'm not going to force you to stay.
variety, beauty, and perfumes are compensation for an adult life fixed to the ground. Their only fleeting moment of freedom are as seedlings, falling to the ground or floating through the air. They've learned and mastered some important rules of survival: adaptation and cooperation.
It's quite easy to say that thanks to evolution, the living systems become more and more clever or more and more intelligent, while intelligence could be defined in various ways.
We generally consider intelligence as a combination of things: the perception of our environment and the ability to react to it, having a memory, being able to communicate, interact socially, and having a brain to coordinate it all. Worldwide, a small group of scientists are at the forefront of this controversial branch of science. The University of Bonn in Germany is a leader in the research of plant intelligence. Here they're exploring one of the fundamental qualities for intelligence: the ability to perceive the environment.
The results we had last year, combined with the work of our colleagues, have shown that plants can interact in many different ways with their environment.
Professor Volkmann conducts his experiments using simple techniques to unlock the secrets of plant perception and intelligence.
There are several plants like pea and beans developing tendrils to find some support to come up to the light and to the air. We are using pea plants like this. Here we have 2 pea plants. And when we are stimulating these tendrils in such a way by a wooden stick 3, 4, or 5 times, then these tendrils will move and respond in direction of the stick, in spite of the fact that we removed this stick.
The pea plant's outer surface is covered with sensors that send a signal to the cells below. The stimulated cells grow less rapidly than the outer ones, causing it to twist around whatever it touches. This is what allows the pea plant to grow in all directions, stretching out, feeling the world around it, grabbing hold, creating the foundations for the rest of the plant to follow. Plants sense their environment. This is true of growing pea plants as it is of their flesh-eating cousins. Carnivorous plants are a little more complex. To ensure the plant captures something edible, the insect must first activate 2 fine hairs inside the trap before it closed. Another fast-moving plant is the sensitive. Water pressure against the cell walls keeps its leaves stiff. When it's pinched or stroked, the water pressure drops and the plant quickly sags. The exact reason why is not known, but the sudden movement from a touch could be a defense mechanism, frightening insects that land on it. Fast-moving plants are uncommon. We mostly see them as static, but this is only because we look at them through human time.
What are the animals that live the longest? I think it's the giant turtles. They live 3 centuries. This seems a long time to us, but for a plant, it's no time at all. There are millions of 3,000-year-old plants. They can live much longer than that. For example, a Protesea from Tasmania, the king's holly, can live for 43,000 years. And in fact, this plant is in its youth and has no intention of dying. All this is to say that time runs differently for plants than for animals.
Scientific studies about plants began less than 100 years ago. In the 1920s, Indian botanist Jagadish Chandra Bose tried to show that plants not only had sensations, but some kind of consciousness. He was well ahead of his time, using electricity to stimulate plants. He launched pioneering research into plant growth and plant reaction to electromagnetic waves. In the 1970s, Soviet researchers flirted with sensitive plants. The results were spectacular. In their experiments, they managed to anesthetize plants with chloroform, stimulate them with candles, or, as in the famous experiments with frogs' legs, submit leaves to electrical pulses to get a reaction. Electricity, touching, fire, chloroform. These are sensations we could imagine affecting a plant. But what about sound? The Desmodium gyrans is commonly known as the dancing plant, in the strict sense of the word.
If you make a noise, you'll see the leaves of this plant move incessantly. But you know, if you touch it instead of making a sound, it doesn't move at all. Actually, it's sound that it's sensitive to.
Dude, I would like this.
They like people to sing a song to them. They like to hear the nicely speech from the people, not from the artificial sound, like from the electronic sound. They like to play with human.
So for us scientists, this is a great problem. For 2 reasons. Firstly, because we don't know how it works. Secondly, and this is perhaps worse, we don't know what it's for. I find this very curious. A plant that makes itself noticed by moving. A predator, a herbivore, a deer, or a horse would see it more if it moved rather than not moving. So there is a real mystery surrounding this plant.
Un mystère au sujet de cette plante.
The dancing plant seems to break all the rules. In the early 70s, at the beginning of the hippie movement, a crazy idea took root. Some people claim that music had a beneficial effect on plants. In doubtful but original experiments, plants were exposed to different styles of music. Jazz or classical music made them grow stronger, while rock music killed them. The musician Roger Roger even composed music specifically for plants. It was called Rhapsody in Green and was meant to help plants grow and bear fruit.
I would totally listen to that.
While the dancing plant reacts to sound, the effect of different musical styles is not something that scientists take very seriously at all. Because science is about facts and supporting evidence. So, back on the crime scene, Van Hoven was searching for both. The pressure was on. The number of dead koodoos was climbing. He had to solve this mystery. Van Hoven and his team of science detectives had two important clues. First, the deaths happened when koodoos were in dense groups. And second, tannin was the killer. And that had to come from a plant. Their plan was to see if a plant could sense the presence of a dense number of animals. For the purpose of the experiment, they became a gang of ravenous koodoos.
We then started looking at the tannin content of the same trees. We used acacias, several species of acacias, and we took the leaves, extracted the tannin, and measured the tannin content. And it was very clear that the tannin was up to 4 times higher on the ranches where there was a lot of browse, a lot of eating of the acacias. So that means the tree responds to overutilization because the trees protect themselves. That's chemical defense. They don't want to be eaten all their leaves because then they're going to die.
The tree that everyone thought was saving the koodoos' lives throughout the terrible drought turned out to be the killer. But another mystery soon emerged. Even the acacias untouched by the koodoos had an increased concentration of tannin in their leaves. Van Hoven thought there might be something in the air.
First we pulled off the leaves and opened up all the little pieces of the branches. So we put the bag over and left it there for about an hour. Then we took the bag off, and now we got the air in which there was also then release of gas from the plant itself. And we take a sample of this air, and that will be then analyzed back in the main lab.
What they quickly found was that as soon as koodoos start overgrazing an acacia, the tree emitted a gas. Ethylene.
Ethylene, when it is liberated out of these stems, it goes normally downwind because it's a very light gas, CH2. It's a small, colorless, odorless gas. But when it gets to other intact leaves, it affects the mitochondria, and the mitochondria then produces the enzymes that catalyze the production for more tannins. It's a chemical communication.
The mystery was solved. The acacias not only sensed the presence of large number of koodoos, but their unseen communication system is what helped doom the large numbers of kudu grazing on the plants.
If you want to manage wildlife, look at the lessons that nature teaches you, and manage according to that.
Ranchers in the Limpopo savanna are now more respectful of the acacia, making sure that their properties are not overpopulated with kudu. Cases like the acacia have scientists now talking about plants having social skills. The oak is another example of trees acting as a community. They can perceive the space around them. If a sapling from another species tries to take root in their territory, the oaks launch a chemical attack, killing the young intruder. We see forests as places of peace and calm, yet they have a surprisingly active and dynamic social life. The way trees communicate is similar to some highly social insects, such as ants. They'll leave chemical trails for others to follow, creating an invisible highway. And when the colony is under attack, soldier ants will release formic acid to warn the others. When plants are stimulated by the outside world, their metabolism changes, and this information is communicated through chemistry.
A plant's going to react on nutrients that is transported by fluid, by water through the root system. It's going to react on light, that is the stimulus for photosynthesis. And it's going to react on damage and infections. So if you've got damage by eating or infections by plant viruses, you break down plant tissues and the plants react on that. They immediately produce some kind of antibodies and they start reacting against that. It's in the human body, you can find the same thing.
The chemistry that plants use to communicate is complex. Japan is in the forefront of this research.
Japanese people and Asian people in general have an insatiable curiosity for plants and animals, for all life around us. This is particularly true in Japan, where the feeling that we are part of nature is very strong.
Japan sees unlocking the secrets of the natural world as a source of innovation and prosperity for the future. The Laboratory of Plant Physiology at Tohoku University is well equipped to study the structural biochemistry of plants. They hope to find out how plants function at the molecular level. So far, they have achieved more than the Soviets ever did in the 1970s. Amongst their experiments, they are asking, how do plants sleep? Do they need sleep? And what happens if they don't? It's common to see these scientists taking their plants out for a morning stroll, moving their prize specimen from one artificial location to another.
This room is called the Artificial Climate Reproduction Room, where we recreate day and night in a 24-hour cycle. Here we have 3 plants on which we experiment with things like movement and sleep. These 3 plants are called Albizia, Senna, and Cassia. I'm currently working on this plant, the Cassia.
All animals and all plants and all organisms have a biological clock that is common for all organisms. Thus, the sleep is not only the task of the animals, and some plants sleep very similar fashion as human beings. That is leguminous plants.
It's 6 p.m. The light is fading. It's time to see how some plants sleep.
The albizia, a plant of the leguminous family, folds its leaves at night. It sleeps. This leaf movement, which we call falling asleep, occurs over a 24-hour cycle. These leaves that are now open, because it's day, will close at night.
In the laboratory, Professor Minoru Ueda and his colleagues sometimes inflict a rather severe treatment on their plants. Leaves are cut, crushed, and ground to extract the molecule thought to be responsible for triggering sleep in plants.
First, I extract the plant's secretion. This process takes about a week. I then purify the extract using a centrifuge, and I repeat this process several times. Finally, I end with a pure substance.
The plants are then subjected to the purified extracts and their reactions studied.
The results are the following. Here we've added potassium chelidonate, and here we've only added water. Where we've added potassium chelidonate, the plant closes itself down and its leaves are in a state of sleep. But where we've added water, the plants remain the same. Its leaves remain open. So we can actually see that the chemical substance controls the process of falling asleep.
They found the key compound that the plant uses to tell itself that it's time to sleep. By using the same compound in a concentrated form, they can speed up the plant's reaction. What happens if you deny plants sleep? Could they be like us, needing sleep to regenerate their bodies and their minds?
If the natural process of sleep is prevented, then after 2 weeks the plant starts to turn yellow. It then withers, and in the end, the plant dies. We cannot draw any conclusions. The experiment was inconclusive as to whether the plant died as a result of hygrometry dysfunction because its biological clock was disturbed. We still don't really understand why plants need sleep.
Experiments in Germany and Japan show that plants react to the outside world and communicate through chemistry. The acacia and oak have even used it to develop social skills. If we accept these abilities in plants, then we have to ask if plants have another essential criteria for intelligence, like memory, being able to retain and recall an event, and learn from it. If we take the case of the dancing plant, then there is little doubt that plants have memory.
If you take a dancing plant from the wild that's never had the opportunity to dance because it's too young or came from a quiet area and try to make it dance, then it doesn't do it very well. It moves a little bit, but clearly doesn't do what you'd like it to do. But then, train it to dance day after day, and you'll be surprised to find that day after day it will dance a little better, to the point where it becomes an exceptional ballerina, and it will stay that way. This plant is capable of something that sports people would call training, and that is based on memory.
In Germany, Professor Volkmann has found that pea seedlings have the capacity for memory.
Here we have 2 pea plants, and we like to investigate if they have a memory and how long this memory is lasting.
Professor Volkmann puts the seedlings in a horizontal position. Up is no longer up, but sideways. If the plants were left in this position, they would work out where up is and start growing in a new direction. The root system of some algae works in a similar way. The filaments responsible for keeping the plant in balance are transparent, so the effect can be clearly seen under the microscope. The trap granules are called statolites, and they are made up of minerals, and being heavier, tell the plant which way is down. We have a similar system in the ear to help us keep our balance. After 30 minutes, Professor Volkmann cools the seedlings down to 4 degrees Celsius, putting them in a suspended state of animation. He wants to see if they'll remember having been put on their sides. After several days, the young peas are taken out of the refrigerator and brought back to room temperature to wake up.
So, after warming up the temperature from 4 degrees in the refrigerator to 22 degrees in the laboratory, we see nicely the response of both plants. They know exactly where up and down was. They remember their stimulation before the weekend, so at least 4 to 5 days. And we see that the response is a little bit different between the two plants, which means the one is better with their remembrance, with their memory, than this one.
The experiment shows that plants have a perception and memory of the space around them. A dancing plant can be trained, building on previous experience. A carnivorous plant will retain the memory of a specific insect's touch for a short time, in case another is nearby. The acacia will remember the kudu's overgrazing for over an hour. Plants have developed ways to store memory different to ours in a way that we don't as yet fully understand. It has allowed them to learn from the past, plan for the future, and work together for the benefit of the species.
The word memory has been used for many different systems. We speak of human memory and we speak of computer memory, which is not the same thing. We speak of memory for the inferior animals. In that case, it's yet another system. And we can even speak of memory for plants, as different authors and scientists have done. What we mean by memory is the capability to store a certain signal for a certain period of time, and in some experiments, the capability to recall that signal with another signal.
It's difficult for us to imagine that memory can be stored outside a brain. Could plants have some kind of central nervous system that we don't quite understand? And if so, where would it be? An audacious idea was proposed in the late 1800s. To understand its origins, we need to use our own memories and go back to where it started. Back to Victorian England and the great biologist Charles Darwin. Darwin's theories on the evolution of species revolutionized the field of biology and changed the way we look at our place in the animal kingdom. But Darwin's contribution to science was much more. In his country retreat in Kent, Darwin experimented on carnivorous and climbing plants. He put forth a daring idea that plant activity was not limited to growth.
Charles Darwin, in his book, speculated on the possibility of there being a root brain, because in Darwin's formulation, the brain was associated with bending movements of roots. We had discovered a special zone just behind the root tip, which seemed to suggest that this region has really some extraordinary physiology in there.
Charles Darwin turned the scientific community on its head, and his writings still resonate today.
You okay?
Darwin started with the fact that plants feed through their roots, just like the head of an animal. A plant's roots would act as a central nervous system. This is what we call root brains theory. The plant keeps its head in the ground and displays its sexual organs to the outside world.
Interesting idea.
At Bonn University, František Beluska, an advocate of root brain theory, has been working for several years on the physiological functioning of roots.
Okay, so these are the seedlings in one. So the plants are extremely sensitive, although they don't look like to be sensitive, but even any small mechanical stimuli, immediately plants react. They initiate chemical, physical, and even electrical responses, and they screen continuously at least 20 different parameters from the environment, and they need to integrate this information all the time in order to be able to adapt.
František Beluska has developed special techniques to observe and capture plants in action.
So in the first movie we will see a root with intact root cap. A root is growing up the slope with a swarm-like behavior, trying to find a weak place in the substrate. This is not just like very rapid movement. This whole sequence takes some 24 hours, and this touchdown movement is in fact taking some 2-3 hours, during which the root apex is trying to grow down the gravity vector.
Under the camera, a root wriggles like a worm, but it's a different story when its cap is cut.
The second movie, we see two situations. The lower one is the intact root with the root cap, and the upper root is without root cap. And you will see very nicely that the upper root is not able to perform this worm-like behavior because it is lacking the root cap. The decapped root is growing even faster as a control root, but without any abilities to search for the weakest point. So it will grow just directly straight in line.
In the 1990s, researchers at the University of Bonn discovered unusual activity in a particular part of the root that they dubbed the zone of transition. Here they found cells containing molecules such as lactin and myosin. The fascinating thing about these molecules is that they are the same found in muscle cells that enable animals to move. The cells in the zone of transition may be very different, but they function in the same way as synapse, the nerve connections in animals that allow neurons in the brain to create circuits with other neurons, as well as muscle and gland cells. It's these synapse connections between cells that allow the complex interchange of information in our bodies, as well as perception, memory, and thought.
Plants know when to go to flowering or when to go to dormancy. These are very critical decisions for the plant, and the whole plant body must react simultaneously. So there must be some system, some central commander in the plant which decides when to start this process.
Current research in plant physiology confirms Darwin's intuitions and ideas. The root system is not only used to feed, but it explores space with purpose and intelligence. The roots process complex information, much like the nervous system of vertebrates. If we look at how plants function and compare it to the animal world, it may not be as different as we'd like to think. If plants resemble us and have a kind of nervous system, then is it possible to talk about plant neurobiology? This is a gray area that some biologists enter without hesitation. In Slovakia, scientists from all over the world gather to attend a symposium. They are not many in their field, and none of them would want to miss this event. Minoru Ueda, Dieter Volkmann, and Franciszek Beluska all attend. They present their experiments and compare their views on a plant's nervous system.
Enables a new research.
The concept of neurobiology, like the concept of intelligence, means many things to many people. The contradictions in the conflict are very interesting and fun to listen to, perhaps bearing more on the other researchers than on the plant neurobiology group.
20, 40, 60, 80, or 20, 40.
These discussions are all part of a healthy debate that steers the scientists toward a greater insight into the world of plants. Scientists are quick to point out that plants do not have a brain or a nervous system. But at the same time, they will say that there are huge similarities at the structural and molecular levels with that of a vertebrate's nervous system. Cells may be very different, but they function very much like neurons and synapses that form circuits. The mechanics of how it's done may be different, but the results are almost identical.
Let's keep the noise down.
Plants need to perceive their environment and act intelligently to make the right choices in order to survive.
Sodass wir sagen können, der Unterschied.
So we can say that the difference between plants and animals, or at least between plants and inferior animals, is not that big when you really look at the cellular and molecular levels.
These claims may seem reasonable, but the world of science is skeptic by nature.
These days it is of course difficult because this field is still not officially accepted, so the mainstream is still not convinced about this idea. So in science it is normal, it is just usual. Science is very conservative and it takes a lot of time to make really breakthrough changes and advances.
The journey of acceptance in science can sometimes be a long and arduous road. Fundamental research into plants can rattle conventional thinking. It sometimes embarrasses and disturbs, but it also opens our eyes and changes the way we look at the world of plants.
In the scientific world of plants, I am absolutely convinced that the greatest discoveries are yet to come.
We have much to learn from the natural world. The idea of plants having intelligence is a contradiction to our worldview, but at the same time, it is deeply consistent with the theory of evolution. All life has branched out from one center, rippling out, finding its own way to earn the right to live and pass on its genetic inheritance. What is true of animals is true of plants. There are superior plants, endowed with greater capability for perception, memory, and communication than others. In other words, with varying degrees of intelligent behavior. If we ask who is superior, animal or plant, then at least, in the Limpopo savanna, the answer is clear. The threatened acacia tree kills the starving kudu. And what if we went a little further and associated survival with intelligence? And we ask who will be around the longest? Then, the answer could be a little disconcerting.
feel like a nuke
The
to wipe
end.
us out all at the same time.
Oh, we barely got that done in time.
Did you get the answer for 17, Dr. Seuss?
Answer for number
Plant
17.
neurobiology, right? Plant neurobiology. Yeah.
What new field of plant biology is not accepted yet by conservative biologists? Plant neurobiology. Yeah, I'm gonna have you guys turn that in.
Right now?
So, yes, we are gonna turn that in. So we got 1 minute left of class. Can I hear, what you guys think? What do you think of the movie?
I wrote down Planet Intelligence. I don't think that's right. I looked it up. Looked up branches related to it. I think it's just
So guys, so we have Sirion saying that overplaying that plants are intelligent.
Yeah, it's
The
like,
intelligence of plants. But how do we know?
because they're not
Just
really
because it's different than how we
consciously
do.
doing this stuff, it's just their bodies reacting to it. It's like my body jolting me awake when I'm trying to fall asleep at 1 a.m.
All right, interesting perspectives. And so what happens is we as humans, we have a certain way of thinking that intelligence has to be a certain way.
But they can't think a certain way.
But intelligence.
I mean, yeah, to be fair, we make up what intelligence is.
Yeah.
So.
And so if we put it in this little box, it has to be this way because we are defining it this way. That can potentially hold us in and not potentially be searching for other things.
Yeah, but it could just mean that we need another word for it. That's
what I
was thinking. Yeah,
Ask a
maybe another
plant
word.
to synthesize thorium and it can't do it.
Did you ever read Flowers for Algebra? That's a book that talks about the definition.
Flowers for what? No, but that sounds really, really good. Flowers for Algebra.
Who says it can't?
Or I'll put it on that agenda.
Yeah, they have enough. But okay, let's say someone next to me knew how to do it and they walked me through it.
Oh, it's a plan. It's up to them.
Guys, let's turn it up here.
But there is.
Please let's turn in your assignments and have a
Goodbye.
wonderful